Okay, so our next job is to make two slot pieces like so. So we're going to turn this piece of wood into this. Again, the advanced way is to make some markings, 14 millimeters away from the edge, 14 away from the edge. Now, the good thing about marking gauges, the reason people use them, is once you've set it, it's now set for as many times as you want to use it. So you can pick up the same marking gauge and go around without having to readjust anything. The other advantage is it provides a little nook into which you can rest a chisel, which makes it a bit more accurate at the end, and it won't be removed by any dirt or, you know, in time it will still be there. Let's just mark this one up quickly. I'll draw into those markings so you can see what's been done. Okay, now these ones, don't forget, they don't look lined up, but the middle part is lined up, the body is the same for both. These are going to overlap, like so. And then we just sand these down. We're going to cut these off and sand them down to make it nice and accurate at the end. This time we are making a slot, so our waist lines are marked in the middle to remind us where to cut, like so. Now, again, we're going to take the tenon saw, and you can have a practice cut in the middle. And then when you come to the final cut, go down to depth, this time placing the saw on the waist side of that line so that you can still see that line, at the end there. Okay, there's I will show you now the easier method is to use our, not the finger jig, almost made a very big mistake, to use the slot jig because we're making a slot. Same way, we're going to get it flush on each side and level at the top, and we're going to pop that into the vise. Okay, keep it a bit tight, check it with your fingers, and then one last tighten up, righty-tighty. This helps us again to use the tenon saw. Now, I need to look over the top of this. It's a bit awkward, but we need to check that marked line. And same on the other side. As before, I go down so I can see that I touched the line on these sides. Now I'm going to go down to the right depth. Okay, now you can see that our slot jig has actually gone inside on purpose. What we need to do now is to, first of all, we're going to cut away the material. To do that, we're going to need a different saw. We're going to need a coping saw. A coping saw can do curvy lines. What it can't do is go down and then come 90 degrees. That's impossible. So what we're doing here is we're going to aim for a big curved angle, so we're going to come down like so, and then when that falls away we can then come in the other side and we can go down to that line. So I'll show you that using our coping saw. Coping saw, first of all, you want to check the blade is nice and on that side that's sharp. We're going to check that it's nice and tight. It should make a kind of high-pitched noise. What we do is put it into the vise. A coping saw is the only saw where we stand 2 feet facing forwards and we hold it with 2 hands. I'm going to start off about halfway up and very slowly very slowly we start to curve around, and we want to land on that line just before we get to the corner, so we've got a straight portion at the end. Now this is really difficult to use because we need to be on the line here and we need to be on the line over here, so it can take quite a bit of work, backing and forwards, checking, double checking. It does take a lot of skill, a lot of patience to make sure we're on the line both sides, above the line on both sides. And once we're on that line, it's easier to continue in a straight until our piece of material is removed. We want to make sure in there we've got a nice sharp corner, so I'm just making sure that's nice and sharp in there. Any debris in the corners gets taken away. So now I can come in from the other side. Now I can come from the other side. It's all about checking, it's all about being patient. And we remove it like so. Again, it's nice and sharp in the corners. Okay, so what that's done is it's gone down to that point where we've marked. We now need to check that the two fit. So I've already made a finger, and I want to make sure this finger here, I'm going to label it number 1, is going to be right for this slot. I'm going to label that number 1 as well. So I now want to just check that they go in. At the moment, you can see they don't. This is far too big for this. The way we're going to increase the size of this is we are going to remove some material from here. So how do we do that? We're going to keep, we're going to open up this size using a bench hook. And a chisel. So first job is going to be to, so first of all we're going to make a marking. So first of all we're going to take finger 1 and slot 1. We're going to check that our markings are correct. So we can leave this one alone. We're going to line up here, and we're just going to check that the distance at the top there is accurate. So we're going to put a little pencil mark where we need to go to, a little pencil mark. In my case, this confirms that mine was correct. It may not for you. We're just going to then make sure that we've got a nice straight line to follow. So maybe using a straight edge. Just check that that is a straight line to follow. Okay. We're then going to go to a long. Using a coping saw, we're going to make sure we go out to the correct distance. And then we're going to take it to a bench hook. Taking a chisel, we're going to position it with our fingers. Okay, not the full distance, about halfway maybe, or a millimetre or so. And we're going to use the palm of our hand. I'm just going to hit down like so. Now that's always working away from us. My fingers are never in front of the chisel. Doesn't take much force just to push. Again, I'm working upwards. And on the other side, about half material. Okay, that just takes the edges off like so. Just at the end, just slopes up. What we can now do is come in with our chisel, fingers on top of the chisel, flat part facing the wood, and again we can just position it in the correct place, and we can just push down to take off little slivers. Just like this way. We can just push down, and it just removes a little sliver of work. At the very top, what we're going to do is just come in sideways. Now that can make these knock off, but don't worry, it's the safest way to do it. And from the other side, we're just going to push down like so. Now if you try and do too much, it's going to go into the work, so you're always trying to get as little as possible. A little tiny sliver is what we're always trying to do. We now need to take the thinner chisel to get into the bottom to clean that up. So okay, like so. Okay, if you really need to, you can use a coping saw if you find that easier, just to get in there and just to clean it up so you've got a nice sharp corners. That might be a method you prefer. We're doing slot 1, let's see if slot 1 fits in now. It's still too tight. That again is a good thing, because we can always take a little bit more off. You can continue using the chisels. You may want to, less preferred method, you may want to use a file. Now, when you're using a file, make sure that you position it so that you don't have this also files here. There's a filing edge, and there's what we call the safety edge, where it's smooth. So make sure your safety edge is facing downwards, and then it won't bury itself into your wood. You want to press against it, and you want to ideally get some movement so it slips. They don't like going forwards much, as you remember. They tend to work better if you slide them at an angle. But it's difficult to get that angle here. Just for the last half a millimetre. Some of you may want to use the file. That's going to be up to you. You can do that as well if you feel you prefer on the slots. Now make sure if you're doing that you keep the file straight and you don't start rocking it around, because you'll very quickly round off the corners here. So it's very important you keep it absolutely straight if you're using a file. But eventually,
What's that then?
it's your hand.
I've put it on back to front.